Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. I am Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Ken W. Stone. Ken W. Stone, the Soul Archaeologist, is a spiritual teacher, messenger, and healer. He's the founder of the Resonance Experiment and author of the forthcoming book, Resonance, The Path of Spiritual Mastery. God expresses through Ken in a unique way. When people sit with him in transmission, they have a profoundly different experience of the divine in their body. For example, he has worked with a number of advanced former students of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who each said, unprompted, following their initial session with him, "That was the deepest spiritual experience of my life." Ken helps leaders, teams, entrepreneurs, and spiritual messengers unlock and express their divine potential in the boardroom, on the playing field, and in the world. His work helps individuals and teams open sustaining deep flow states professionally and personally through unique experiential learning practices. So welcome, Ken. It's just an honor to have you as a guest today.
It's an honor to be with you, Dr. Lottie. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, did you come into the world as a healer, or did you have a normal life and then all of a sudden it took a 90-degree turn? Can you tell us?
It was more than a 90-degree turn.
How did you end up as a spiritual teacher, messenger, and healer?
Well, kicking and screaming, in part. I used to make my living as a mortgage lender. And so as all healers do, it's part of the progression. You go to mortgage lending and then eventually you become, I'm just kidding. I learned to meditate in August of 2007. And I actually went to an in-residence meditation retreat in Sedona, Arizona in September of 2007. And at the time, I didn't even know what Sedona was about. I just knew that's where the retreat was. And the retreat was another in a series of things that I felt called to do, but that I was scared to do. And I had started, for whatever reason, I'd sort of made a decision. I am going to do the thing I'm afraid of next, again and again and again and again. And so that retreat was the next thing I was afraid of. And I went and did it. And then a fellow participant wrote on a piece of paper as we were in the closing meditation, "You should be working as a healer." And I started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know what the word healer meant. It wasn't on my radar. It wasn't something I wanted. I had been asking in meditation or in reflection and visualization time for a while before, what is my purpose? I felt sort of spontaneously guided to ask that question. But I didn't think this was the answer. I just thought something's wrong with this guy, even as I'm sobbing uncontrollably, And then when we came out of silence, he said to me, "You're going to discover you've done this in many prior lifetimes, and this is more natural than breathing for you." And I started sobbing again. And again, my mind is thinking, what's wrong with you? I don't know what you're talking about. That's too weird for words. And yet I'm having this, full body sort of soul response to those words. And that was the beginning of it was more than a 90-degree turn. I'm going to say it's 180 degrees. I went, well, except I wasn't going back to where I went. Maybe it is 90 degrees. Or opening to a new dimension. I don't even know how to describe the shift in my life. It was so dramatic and so full of, everything that it needed to be full of. I resisted it. I struggled with it. It brought up all the things that I needed to address internally within myself. It animated my separate self. It did all the things that are so essential in the journey of integration. And it did them really quickly. It was a very compressed experience.
So here you are in Sedona at this retreat, and this man's telling you have to be a healer.
Right.
And you're thinking, is this man crazy? Am I crazy? But you feel called to it, right?
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
So what happened next? When did you start working as a healer, or how did you get into that? I mean, it's not like you just one day you hang up the hat of your previous job, and then all of a sudden, magically, you are the healer the next.
Well, kind of. It was more like that than I think. My a family member, my aunt's husband, he said to me, Ken, your life is a little bit like a movie, and if it weren't you living it, I would think it's not real. And when he said that to me, I thought, well, I don't see what you're talking about, because I've been living it. But yeah, I guess part of the thing was that I really felt a deep connection with this person who said this to me, and I recognized that connection before he said this. So actually, on the first day of the retreat, I walked up to him and said, "How do I know you?" And I was so uncomfortable in this setting, in residence. I mean, psychologically, I was not like, yeah, I'm in my groove here. I was thinking, why am I here? And yet I went up and talked to somebody I didn't know. Again, not really kind of my natural place. So afterwards, I was in touch with him, and I actually hired him for my very first intuitive reading of my entire life. And it was a couple days after Christmas, and my life was kind of falling apart at the time. And so I wanted to know, are things going to turn out? And all he wanted to talk about was healing. So again, I cried through the whole thing. And when he does readings, they're in trance and his voice changes. So that's even, you know, for me at the time, it was weird. I thought, this is so weird, but I'm doing this. And in that session, I heard him say, you know what you're doing. You don't need to be trained. Go do it. And so 1st of January, 2008, somebody's got a migraine headache that I'm hanging out with. And I said, apparently I'm a healer. Should we see if this works? And I put my hands on their head, and my hands and feet started buzzing, and the headache went away. And I went, well, that's kind of weird, but also it just seemed improbable, like this is just a coincidence. And then the level of work, it was like climbing up a cliff wall in terms of what happened after that. One of my roommates from the retreat called, and he says, what are you up to? And I say, apparently I'm a healer. And he says, well, can you find it in your heart to heal me? And I'm like, there's nothing to find, man. What's going on? And so he describes this medical condition that was pretty serious. And he was somebody who had done all sorts of things. Like he'd hung out with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He'd hung out with the Art of Living Foundation and the guru there, which was the people that put on the retreat we were at. He was certified teacher in Est, and on and on. Like he was all into the Eastern stuff and the Western stuff. And no one, despite all these resources, had been able to figure out what was going on in his world. And so we did a session. I think it was right then. I mean, I just walked down to my truck out of my mortgage practice, and he went out to his lake, and we weren't even connected over the phone. And it was some weeks later when we got on the phone, and he said to me, I'm having a hard time talking about this because it was so profound for me. And my knees are knocking because I'm thinking, what happened? Like, did I hurt you, or what, what's going on here? And he said, look, I mean, that was the deepest spiritual experience of my life. And all these things healed within 24 hours. Like the things he described all cleared up immediately. And then he starts telling me about all this other stuff. His relationship with his wife has changed. His relationship with food. He's not drinking alcohol anymore, blah, 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 blah. And my jaw is coming unhinged more and more as he's describing these things. And also it kind of felt like a 2x4 to the head. It was really disturbing to me in a way, because it was like, I don't even understand what's happening here. And this guy's talking about his life being changed. And how is that even possible? I mean, it was really, so it both took place very quickly, the work. And then I sort of stayed hidden in the sense that I didn't tell anyone publicly, but people started referring folks probably for about 2.5 years until the summer of 2010. And at that point, I'd been doing it long enough, and I just thought, I'm feeling called. and, let's see what happens next. And I actually left mortgage lending at the end of 2010 and was damn near homeless in 2011. And I mean, there's a whole journey there. The separate self integrates however it needs to. And mine certainly jumped up and down at the opportunities here. And, deeper surrender and on and on and on. All the things that I think are universals for everyone. But I was living them in a very compressed and ultimately a very public way as I engage with this. Yeah.
So you heal this guy, you provide healing, and then you're thinking, wow, that was just a coincidence. How long did it take you until you realized that it wasn't coincidences and something was actually changing for these people?
I mean, it was pretty quick. It took me a long time to accept it, but I accept that. How do I say that? It's different. I think there's an internal acceptance that happens pretty quickly, or in me happened pretty quickly, but whether or not I was willing to own it publicly, totally different issue, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And I mean, there was another thing that happened around the same time. A buddy of mine, his wife was bit by a cat. We had lunch the next day. I laid out all these crazy things about my life. He didn't run away. I said, apparently I'm a healer. He still didn't run away. He said, let's do an experiment. I didn't realize I needed permission. I did a healing on his wife without her knowledge, not with her present. The next day, the doctor calls up and says to his wife, we ran labs from Wednesday. Lunch was on Thursday. This is now the day after I did the hidden healing. And you have to get to the hospital immediately. And then the doctor unwraps her thumb, and there's no physical evidence whatsoever that she was ever bit, and her blood is totally clean. The doctor loses his stuff. I think my buddy used a different word, but we'll keep it G-rated. And I lose my stuff. I'm like, so those things happened very quick. That was all within the first 3 months. And I would say by maybe within 3 or 4 months of that, I was actively working with people. I was at another retreat. I told a friend there, somebody comes down off the elevator, so-and-so's up on the 5th floor. They need an energy healer. My friend grabs my arm and pulls me out from behind and says, Ken's an amazing energy healer. And I'm like, this was a secret. This is not for, but it's too late. The leader of the event says, okay, you go up. And I'm like, she's coming with me. I'm not going up there on my own. And on the way up, my friend is telling me things about what I'm doing that aren't related to what I've told her. It's like she's all of a sudden just tuned in intuitively. And, again, this is somebody I sat with in person. This person was like really violently ill, running to the bathroom, just in a horrible space. And within 45 minutes, felt fine and just started talking. And I thought, I'm going to get up and leave now. And then we go into silence for 5 days. And at the end of the 5 days, I walk up to her and I say, what happened? And she's like, most powerful healing I've ever had in my life. Do you want referrals? And I say yes, without controlling my, so yeah, it was really, nutty. It was a huge disconnect from the way I thought the world worked, who I thought I was, who I thought God was. My relationship with divinity, all that stuff just got completely torn apart in the most beautiful way.
So do you belong to any specific religion now?
No, not now. It's so interesting because, it's like that would make it easier in a way. It would make it easier for other people, I think, for sure. Because for some people, let's say, because the idea of spiritual healing within a tradition, there's all this history there, goes back hundreds, thousands and thousands of years, right? And so there's this relationship, I think, that a lot of people assign to religion as a pathway to intimacy with divinity, and that it's that intimacy with divinity or the avatar of the tradition, let's say, that leads to these kinds of gifts expressing themselves. And um, for whatever reason, I guess part of my path was I was raised Catholic, but I left the Catholic Church in my adolescence, and that was my choice. I didn't want to continue. And mostly because of dogma and, sort of rules about God. But then also I wondered, is there even a God? So I had my own sort of journey there. And but what's really weird is that when I work with people, or beautiful, I think is a better way of saying it. I work with people of all traditions and all over the world. And I'm not studied in their tradition. I'm not really studied in any tradition. I haven't gone to school for this. I haven't gone to school for spirituality or religion or anything. And yet somehow we have these conversations that end up in with their reference point, the mystical tradition in their religion, where we're talking about exactly the same thing, but I'm talking about it from an experiential perspective, and I don't even realize that there's an anchor point for them. And it doesn't really matter what tradition or religion they come from, or their beliefs, their spiritual beliefs, or whatever. It's just like there's this beautiful common space where people begin encountering the divine. They have their own intimate experience of it, and it's really extraordinary to be able to witness that and be present with that with other people, as you know.
Yeah. So you were talking about when you did this healing on somebody and your hands were buzzing.
Yeah.
So what happens? Is that something that happens when you work as a healer? You feel like a buzzing, or?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's just this physical resonance that goes through my body. And it's maybe the first way that divinity communicates to me. I guess it's one of the clairs, And then there are all sorts of other layers of awareness and insight and so on that follow or have followed over time, And it's interesting because they're really dependent on the individual. But one of the things that's consistent for me is the physical sensation. And so when I'm working with a group, I have an experience of the collective, and not just the collective that's present. I do a lot of virtual work. And so I have an experience of everyone who will ever experience that session, that transmission right then. Even though I couldn't name them, I couldn't tell you how many there are. I just have an experience of all of them sort of outside of time and space. Yeah. So those shifts, I guess the first method that I experience that shift that's going on within people is for me physically. But then a lot of people that I'm working with start having sensations in their body they've never had before, and other things just begin erupting within them. One of the ways I try to describe it to people who are like, what is this? It's sort of like the divine in me enlivens the divine in you. You already have all this stuff. I'm not sending you anything. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm actually not holding an intention or anything. There's nothing that I'm doing to invoke this. This is just who I am, apparently. And part of that results in something going on within you, and you discover more of who you are. And turns out to be kind of amazing and wonderful.
So you mentioned the resonance. I know you worked on the resonance experiment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had this idea a number of years ago. What would happen if we just pulled together a bunch of people, and the label is, let's have an experiment around resonance, but let's not define any of this, right? So, I can talk about resonance or divine resonance, but I'm not going to say, here's what this means to me, because we're going to do an experiment. So you figure it out for yourself. You see what unfolds in your awareness and in your experience in your body. And we did it virtually, no cameras on. So it was audio only. And I'm sure I'm going to be doing this again in the future. It was so much fun. And then I had some guidance to kind of stop for a while and focus on the book. But what it has led to and what has resulted from it is people from all different traditions and backgrounds sitting together, having a common experience that is entirely unique and individual somehow. I don't know how those words fit together, and then it's so fun to hear people reflect on their experience and the conversations that happen out of that. And then all the things that appear to make us separate from each other, that that we label. This person has these beliefs. All that stuff just melts away in the context of these experiments, because now all of a sudden we're having this common experience, but I get to define it for myself, and that perspective is honored. I mean, as a participant, I don't mean as the person who's facilitating, and each person gets to do that for themselves. And there's no wrong answer. There's no, it has to be a certain way. I'm not sitting there dangling, here's what it looks like if you're succeeding. Whatever's unfolding is success. And so people get to come wherever they are in their developmental journey and consciousness, wherever they are in their belief system, and on, and just open to a deeper experience of some unknown dynamic with what I refer to as divinity, but they can call it whatever the heck they want.
So you also talk about the illusion of separation. So, can you elaborate on that?
Well, so, I mean, I'm sure, I know what the illusion of separation is. I'm sure we have a very common perception on, or at least common enough that we can have a meaningful conversation, and probably everyone listening has some idea of it. But just for the sake of giggles, I'll just say my definition of the illusion of separation is the experience and the perception that we are disconnected from each other, ourselves, and divinity. And so we have this idea, this experience, and it's a dominant experience that happens, I believe, for every single human being. And I actually see it as an aspect of the developmental journey in consciousness. In other words, when we're born, I don't think the illusion of separation has dropped in yet, but somewhere in the single digits, it happens. And it happens through a pretty uncomfortable and unpleasant dynamic. Every human being has an experience of being victimized in some way, and without getting into qualifying any of that, it's just, I believe it is a fact. And when that happens enough, the consciousness with which we're born starts to melt away. I don't know if that's real anymore, because we're not developed enough to have those thoughts that way at that age. And we drop into this experience of separation. And then all of a sudden, there's this entire cosmology that actually, I think our culture is built around. I think there are cultures in the world where this may not be the case, and yet still the illusion of separation persists until it integrates. So another way to think of the illusion of separation is the source of all pain and suffering. There's the real simple definition. And I also think that it is God's greatest gift to us, which ruffles a lot of feathers. A lot of people get upset about that when I say that. But I don't say it to ruffle feathers necessarily, although I'm not bothered if I'm ruffling people's feathers. I say it because from my perspective, it seems absolutely true. This, like, when we get our buttons pushed, we human beings get our buttons pushed. My language for that is that there's the separate self being animated, the part that thinks it is not whole, that it's disconnected, right? And it gets wound up, it's upset, it's angry, it's whatever it is, there's a wounded dynamic, whatever the heck it is. And with that is this extraordinary gift, another aspect of the whole self, but it's buried inside this sort of, manure covered gift, and that dynamic is so extraordinary. And it takes us a lot of years, decades of our lives to sort of work through enough developmental sort of consciousness work to recognize this. But once we get there, we get to celebrate, and we sort of consciously then are calling home more and more of ourselves. And in the process, we experience ourselves as more and more whole. And then the raw expression of divinity as each of us rips through all the illusion, and all that's left is this experience of wholeness. And it's really incredible on so many different levels. I mean, from my perspective, that's a description of healing, right? What people think of as physical healing or spiritual healing or emotional and so on. That's one of the things that happens in that dynamic. But another thing that happens is we start uncovering our gifts, our deeper purpose. I mean, and this can lead to sort of the excitement that I went through, mortgage lender, to, you went through a little bit of a transition yourself. I mean, it doesn't necessarily cause that kind of what people might think of as disruption. I think it was an incredible gift to have that opportunity to come to this deeper purpose. So yeah, the illusion of separation, that's a rich topic.
Right, for sure. So that divine gift that we have inside of ourselves that everybody
Yeah.
has.
Yeah.
How do we learn to experience that divine within ourselves?
Well, I mean, I must be some sort of natural teacher because I'm always wanting to try to describe, here's how this happens. But I mean, for the first number of years, I had no language whatsoever. There were no words when I was working with people. People would call me up and say, so and so says you're the guy for blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, meh, I don't know what to say about it, but yeah. Or they'd say, so and so says I should do something with you. What do you do? And I'd be like, I don't do anything, but I. So, I mean, there's all these downloads and stuff, and I have all these sort of temporary structure that I teach people around this. But I mean, the quick answer, if I still have an opportunity to offer one with all of that, is that the experience of that supersedes everything else. It's like holding a newborn baby or sitting with a loved one when they transition out of the body, or making love with your beloved for the first time. There's an experience that happens there that supersedes all knowledge, and it actually replaces it even. And somehow that happens when I get to work with people. So, and it doesn't really matter if they're, sitting next to me in person or listening to a recording that I did 10 years ago. There's an experience there. So the thing I'm always encouraging people to do is to open to the experience, whether it resonates to do something with me or take a free class that I offer, whatever. It's not about the sort of the method as much as it is just have the experience. And for a lot of seekers, they've been looking for that their whole lives. And, it's a lot of swinging and missing, or they have it, but then it fades away. And again, for some reason, when I work with people, it doesn't fade away. It just builds. It's a cumulative thing. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of the experience end of that. And I've got a lot to say about how, but yeah, let's go for experience.
So I know you work with different kinds of healings. Do you do like physical healings, spiritual healings?
It's everything. It's not, this is the thing that's just so wonderful and sort of awe-inspiring to me. It's, first of all, if you said to me, what are you doing? The literal answer is, I don't know and nothing, right? So something is just happening, right? So I'm not sitting there saying, bing, 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 this is, now we're doing a healing. I mean, there's words I use, but the words are just a way of demarcating the session for me and for the people participating. And then after that, I think the best way to say it is that exactly what someone needs to support them in their spiritual journey is what shows up. And sometimes that's congruent with what they want. And sometimes it's not, right? So, I mean, early on, I did a lot of work with physical symptoms and stuff. And I would get calls from people and they would say, well, can you heal fill in the blank? And I would say, well, let me be clear. I'm not doing the healing. That's really between you and the divine, however you think of that, doesn't matter. And I don't know. Let's figure it out. But if knowing the answer to that is important to you, probably I'm not the right person to be working with, because we're opening up to something that's so much bigger than us. And this is not about control. This is not about making something that we want to have happen. It might be that for you, but it can't be that for me. If I get involved in that, it just mucks up the whole thing. It just doesn't work at all. And so the kinds of things that happen, I perceive them as byproducts rather than the focus. To me, the focus is, maybe this will make sense. There isn't even a focus. I just see the people. I mean, this is sort of bold claim, but I don't know what else to say about it. I feel like I see people the way God sees them. I don't know what else to say. So like if somebody's got a problem, I don't see a problem. I just see, and it's not something I'm projecting. It's not something I'm imagining. It's just a fact when I look at them, but it doesn't need to be a visual thing. Most of my work, except more recently, there's no Zoom, no camera on, none of that. It's not about the visual connection. It's about that interior dynamic. Yeah. And then all sorts of wonderful things happen. Like, my friend that I worked on who had all these physical healings and, relational healings. And yeah, I remember once I was working with a spiritual messenger who was a friend of mine, and we did a session and there was no particular focus. And then she went to see a chiropractor she worked with for 20 years. And the chiropractor was like, your spine is straighter than I've ever seen, in the decades I worked with you. What the heck did you do? And she was like, oh, I did a session with Ken. Maybe that's what it was. I had no idea that was going on. It wasn't in my awareness at all. Just her as the embodied expression of divine presence, and not as an idea, just a fact. That's what was going on for me as we were sitting together virtually.
What is your understanding of what's really going on when you're healing somebody like that?
Well, I think part of what's happening is the illusion of separation is lifting for them. I feel like they're beginning to have an experience of themselves as an undistorted expression of divinity. And because there are no words, or even if there are words, they're not about this. They're discovering something about themselves that is completely disconnected from their entire thought process, their whole life. And I don't mean people don't think they're whole. It's just that, when I think of myself from my separate self's perspective, what does wholeness mean? I think it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. But the experience of wholeness is not a list of knots. It's an actual very affirmative, resonant experience. And yeah, so I think that's what's happening, is that as we're sitting together, it's like that standing wave of divine presence is just enlivened within them. And the path that it takes within them is very much about their process, their relationship, their life. Their relationship with divinity. And it's not dependent on a set of beliefs. I can remember working with somebody early on who was like, I don't know if I believe in what you're doing. She was getting really frustrated. And I said, I don't know if I believe either. This isn't about belief, and that is such a disconnect for so many people, because, in separation, we think I need to focus my mind a certain way. I need to hold intention. I need to think about things and work them out in my mind to make them come true in my life. And there's a lot of support and metaphysics that supports that. But developmentally, there's a glass ceiling there. And when people hit the glass ceiling, one way or another, a lot of them end up learning about me. It's like, oh, here's this weirdo who gives us a chance to experience moving through this glass ceiling without any intention, without any control, without trying to cause anything. Something else will unfold.
Did anyone ever ask you to help them, let's say, with a physical condition, and you said, sure, let's try it, but then nothing happened? Like physically, they did not get any better?
For sure. Sometimes what gets enlivened is more discomfort, more pain, because there's some trauma, there's some, incomplete, whatever it is, artifact left over. Maybe it's this lifetime dynamic. Maybe it's coming in from another lifetime, if that's not too much of a record scratch for your community here. And, I used to try to trace that stuff down and understand it and explain it to people. But basically, the illusion of separation makes us think that understanding things is the key. But understanding things is just a way to keep chasing our tail. It's just a way of thinking I'm in control and I can be in more control if I get what's going on here. And if we need to understand something that's going on, it's that we're not in control. and there's something else that is waiting to express more fully, and we don't need to control it, and it's not a problem. So yeah, people will come and say, yeah, I want to work on this. And then all of a sudden they're in excruciating discomfort because the source of the thing that is showing up that they want to resolve is now enlivened. And now they have an opportunity to transmute that. And the path there is to feel it and to allow it to express fully, at least in the context of the work that divinity does through me. And some people are ready for that and some people aren't.
So why do you think some people heal and some people don't? Do you think that we incarnate to have certain experiences in this life?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the point of life is to integrate. That's it, right? We're in the process. And what I mean when I say integration is, I mean, we could talk about the body, mind, and soul and all that. That's wonderful. But what I'm talking about is the rest of it, sort of what lies behind that illusion, that mirror. And it's another illusion, but there's the separate self and the whole self. And I mean, these are just the separate self is really the whole self just masquerading as the illusion of separation, right? So I'm just so we're clear about that. But in that dynamic, each of us, I've come to realize, is doing exactly what we need to do to integrate. Each of us, each and every person, without exception on the planet, everyone. And so, that is, for me, a huge source of freedom and liberation. But that's not always how that news is greeted by others. And, if there's a really strong attachment to something shifting or being other than it is, that can really get in the way of surrender, of opening up to a deeper experience of divinity. And there's that glass ceiling of what I think of as stage 2 consciousness. So yeah, I try to be very cautious with people about, and some people just sort of get it intuitively and got it way before I understood it. They're like, I'm not ready to work with you yet. And I would be like, why not? And then, years go by and I'm like, oh, I see. Because the big stuff's going to come up. And when people are ready to deal with the big stuff, there's nothing better than the big stuff coming up. But if they're not ready to deal with the big stuff, there's nothing worse than the big stuff coming up. And so somewhere along the way, I started having conversations with people that wanted to work with me one-on-one. And they went something like this: are you ready for the stuff to hit the fan in an epic way? And they're like, you think you're that powerful? And I'm like, doesn't have anything to do with me. Has to do with the way divinity works through me. So if you're ready to knock that last 3% out, I'm all over it. This is going to be incredible. But if you're not ready, let's not start, because once we start it, there's nothing we could do. The fuse is lit. We're going. And you could fire me. We don't have to work together. It's not about me. It's about, there is something unfolding here. So why don't people heal? I think we get attached to what healing is and what that looks like, rather than trying to understand or recognize the path to integration maybe involves suffering, and that suffering is incredibly instructive and valuable for recognizing the illusion of separation for what it is. And because each of us is doing exactly what we need to do to integrate, that looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. And so important for me not to be attached to that, and, encourage the people I'm blessed to work with not to become attached to that either.
So it's more like, well, let's give it a shot. And if it works, it works, because you can't guarantee that somebody is going to actually physically or spiritually heal.
Well, I think here's what I can say. What is needed will always happen. So something profound is going to take place, whether or not you're consciously aware of it, whether or not it fits with what you're looking for, who knows, right? You may look in the rearview mirror years later and go, oh my gosh. I did a session with somebody who actually, this was a number of years ago. I had donated a session to an auction to help raise money for a friend of mine who has a foundation in honor of a child who was killed in her teenage years. And this person won the auction on the session with me and had the session with me. And years later, she showed up at a retreat, an in-person retreat that I was doing. And we were passing the mic around to introduce, and I didn't recognize her name or anything. And she said, my last session with Ken was 5 years ago. It's taken me 5 years to integrate what happened then, and now I'm back for more. And I went, I remember you. So that's, some people are never aware of it. Some people are aware of it immediately. Some people take 5 years to integrate. And I just have deep trust, and faith is not the right word, because I feel like I'm seeing it happen. So but I absolutely trust whatever needs to happen is going to happen. I don't ever have nerves before a session. I'm just like, let's just see how divinity shows up in the form of this individual that I get to work with, and how divinity shows up to work with them. And I can't believe that it's not even a front row seat, that I'm right here watching this take place. And the mystery is revealing itself, or more of the mystery is revealing itself. And what an incredible opportunity.
I know you are writing a book. It's called Resonance, the Path of Spiritual Mastery. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book is going to be about?
I could tell you a lot about what the book's about, but I'll be brief in it. It is based on the introductory class that I've been teaching for a number of years called Igniting Resonance, Fueling the Path of Spiritual Mastery. And there are 9 kind of core themes in the class and in the book, one of which is the illusion of separation. Another one is about healing. Another one is about soul embodiment and resolving the trauma cycle. And another one's about the stages of consciousness. And so the class was formed out of, actually, the book that I started writing more than 10 years ago. I kept thinking, oh, here's something else I need to add to the introduction. And then eventually the introduction became a separate book. And then I realized I better teach this, because I like to teach first before I write, or in conjunction with writing. And I sold a class and marketed it to my community. And I said, this is a 4-session class turned into 9 sessions, I mean, so then the writing process has just been incredible. It just, for me, it has brought such an incredible depth of intimacy with divinity. But yeah, it's just these really kind of, for me, they're like the foundation, the bedrock underneath the foundation of spirituality. And I find that over the years, when I'm doing a Q&A or teaching or doing a resonance experiment, these questions, these sort of 9 questions, come up over and over and over again. And so, yeah, this is book 1, and then book 2, and so on will follow.
I love it. I can't wait for it to become available.
Me too. I'm looking forward to that.
So it's been such a pleasure to have you as a guest today. So, but before we wrap up, can you tell us about any upcoming retreats or classes, your website, and how people can find and learn more about you?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me here. I've enjoyed absolutely every moment of our time together, from even before we hit record. It's just been lovely to connect with you and with your community. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. My website's a wonderful way to connect. It's kenwstone.com. And on my website, there are all sorts of different resources, but one of them that I would encourage anyone who's sort of interested in dipping their toe in the water. I want to experience a little bit more what this guy's talking about, see what's happening here. There's a free 17-week program. It's a class, and I taught it in 2021. So it's available anytime you go to my website. You can just go there. It's called Exploring Divine Resonance. And you just put your name and your email address in, and then you get a login to my online learning platform. And it is, as I said, and then there's a way to ask questions in the class of me, and then I'll get on and personally respond. Somebody recently was going through the class, and she's like, I still have a hard time believing that this is an intro to the intro, because this has really, rocked my world and opened up a bunch of new stuff for me. And this has really been extraordinary. I can't imagine how this seems pretty advanced for an intro to an intro, but anyway, that's what it is. It's an intro to the intro. It's the class that comes before Igniting Resonance. And it's full of lots of teaching, lots of transmission and silence, and Q&As. And as a participant, you can ask questions in my online learning platform, and I'll respond to them personally. So I would really welcome people to take that step if what we're talking about and my approach to spirituality resonates, and you're interested in seeing what that experience of resonance might be in your body.
Do you also have any retreats coming up, or where people can work with you in person?
Yeah, I do. I have an ongoing virtual retreat that I've been doing for it's more than 2.5 years now. Every other week, we gather on Zoom, and new people come into the circle all the time. And so there's information about that on my website, but the name of the retreat is the Deep Dive. So we take a deep dive every 2 weeks, deep dive in consciousness, deep dive in an experience of the divine within. And if you want to go directly to it, I think you can find the deep dive online at deepdiveworkshop.com. It'll just direct you into my website to the information page about the workshop. But yeah, we're having this conversation, at least as we're recording it, on a Wednesday, and tomorrow we're doing a deep dive. So tomorrow, we'll get the deep dive group together and sit together, and I'll be reflecting on some things for probably 20 or 30 minutes. And then we'll be in silence for probably an hour and a half in transmission. And then there'll be an opportunity for participants in that retreat group to ask questions. And it's been a wonderful resource for the people that are involved in it. And I've enjoyed every moment of it. And as far as I know, I'll continue on with it for a while. So yeah, lots of great resources there.
That's wonderful. And I will put your website in the podcast notes. So you can just go to the notes and click on his link to his website and then go sign up for his newsletter and his classes and learn more about Ken. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time and being a guest on Dr. Lottie Science with Soul today. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Dr. Lottie, thanks for having me. And thank you for the work you're doing in the world as well.